Have you ever been falsely accused? Has someone ever made an accusation about you that just was completely untrue, and it kind of hurts your reputation a little bit, at least for a time? And maybe some have made judgments on the things that people have said. They make judgments on you based on a false accusation, based on something that may have never happened. Well, for me personally, I get really offended, not as much when people say something bad about me, but when they say something bad about someone that I know and love. They say something about my wife or about a friend and I know it not to be true. I will tell you this, even the church that I grew up in, when somebody makes a false accusation about those people and I know it not to be true, it offends me. It upsets me. And I will come to the rescue and say, no, that's not what they believe. This is what they believe. And the reason I know is because I went to that church. And I'm quick to do that. I'm quick to do that for my friends, for my family, quicker than I would for myself. I don't know why, but that's how I'm built. Well, the thing that offends me the most is when the God that I worship is falsely accused, and when His Son is falsely accused. And the reason that I'm giving this sermon is because I hear a growing number of people seem to say, well, you know, when I read the Bible, they say, I see two different gods. I see an Old Testament God and a New Testament God. Well, I'm going to tell you, when I read the Bible, I see the same God from start to finish. I don't see two different gods. I see a creator that began this book. It begins with a creator who created people to live forever, to have a direct relationship with Him for eternity. And because of bad choices, that was lost, at least for a period of time. And He tries ever so hard to restore that relationship throughout this book. And at the end of this book, in prophecies that are not yet fulfilled, He restores that relationship. That's yet in our future. But in the meantime, He has given us a way, Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, to breach that gap, even though we live in this horrible, sinful world. And because of this thing called sin, it causes people to come to quick judgment and falsely accuse the Father and His Son of things that simply are not true. And that's why I'm giving this sermon this morning. Because a growing number of people that I have interaction with, that I've come across, that I've witnessed to, that maybe I see from day to day, are coming to these conclusions. And when I ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, I watched this video, or I read this book, or I saw this. I said, wait a minute. Did you read this book? Is this the book you're talking about? Oh, well, that book can't be trusted. Well, what are you basing this book can't be trusted on? Well, I read this other book that told me. Wait a minute. You're falsely accusing this book of being wrong, and you haven't taken the time. Oh, I've read it. Yeah, I've read it. Well, a cursory reading doesn't do it. We have to study it. There's a lot of pages here. There's a lot of information here. And I'm getting things like, it's contradictory. The Bible does not contradict itself. If it seems to contradict itself, it's because there's something that I don't understand. I know that much about it. I've studied it enough to know that. Most people don't. They go by what they're told, by what they see, by what they hear, by what others have said, by what videos tell them, by what other books tell them. And I'm going to go here just for a moment because somebody said to me one day, they said, well, what book do I read to help me to understand the Bible better? This one right here. This one right here. I don't need another book to tell me what this book means, because if I do that, I'm getting another person's ideas. God speaks to us through His written word, through the printed page, through this book called the Bible. So I want you to open your Bibles with me to Exodus chapter 5. Now, there are so many accounts that we could go to in the Bible, and I picked this one for a reason. One of the things that I struggle with, and most of you who know me personally know this, is patience. I'm not a very patient person. I'm very impatient. I want everything now. And I think the world in general, as time goes on, I call it, I've never heard others say it, but maybe they do. I call it, we live in a microwave society. In other words, when I was a kid, microwaves hadn't quite come on the market yet. And I might have told you this before. I remember my dad telling me when I was a kid, he says, they're working on an oven that you'll be able to take a cup of water and put it in there in a coffee cup, in a mug, put it in there, cold water, and within a couple of minutes it will be boiling. And you'll be able to reach in and grab the handle of the mug and pull it out. And I said, no way. No way. That's how I felt. I believed it because my dad told me. And you believe what your parents tell you. And sure enough, by the time I was, I think, 10 or 11, the first microwaves started coming out. And they were selling them in stores, and they were really expensive. And because my dad worked in a place where he worked at Montgomery Ward at the time, and he could get a discount, he bought a Montgomery Ward microwave, and he brought it home, and he showed me that could be done. Because up to that point, when you put things in the oven, everything was hot. That you couldn't touch the handle. You had to reach in with and see, to kids today, that's something that's, you can't grab it by the handle? No, when you put it in the oven, it's hot. But in a microwave oven, it only heats the substance, the liquid in the cup. The cup might get warm as a result of the liquid. So we live in a microwave society. I want it cooked now. You can take that a hot dog and you can put it in the microwave, and in 30 seconds it's hot enough that you can't touch it, you can't eat it. A slice of pizza, you can do it within a minute, and it used to take 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. A microwave society. I want it now. That's the world we live in. That's my personality. I want it now. So let's look at Exodus chapter 5, and keep in mind, this is a real account. I'm assuming knowledge on the part of those of you who are tuned in, those who are listening, and because of that, I'm not going to go through the history of how these people ended up in slavery in Egypt. I'm hoping that you know and understand how that happened. So we're going to begin in Exodus chapter 5, and this is where Moses and Aaron are standing here before Pharaoh. It says in chapter 5, verse 1, afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus says Jehovah God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh says, who is Jehovah that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know Jehovah, nor will I let Israel go. So, first of all, is this true that he didn't know this God? Let me assure you that he's a king. He's familiar with the name. He knows at least that name. He might not know his personality. He might not know him as you know someone else. I might know your name, but I don't necessarily know who you are. So he knew the name. But he says, who is this Jehovah that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know Jehovah, nor will I let Israel go. Verse 3, so they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to Jehovah our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. So all they wanted was 3 days. They were asking to go out for 3 days. And notice what it says, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. They're accusing him of, if we don't do this, he's going to destroy us. Verse 4, then the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take this people from their work? Get back to your labor. And Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor. Now, I want to stop here because this word rest, it's actually the word Sabbath. And here we have this pagan king that understands the concept of what they wanted. Why? Because he understood the identity, at least partially, of their God. And he knew that their God required rest. He knew this. He uses the same word that's used in Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, where God rested from his work. Same Hebrew verb, Sabbath. Verse 6. So the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves, and you shall lay on them the quota of bricks that they made before, that you shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words." And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go get yourselves straw where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced." So do you see what's happening? Pharaoh used to provide the materials that they needed to make the bricks. And now he's saying, I'm not providing that anymore. You know what? Because you're asking for rest and you want to worship this God that requires that you rest, I'm not going to let you rest. I'm going to make it more difficult. I'm going to add to your load, and you're still going to get the same amount of work done. That's really what he's doing. So verse 11, it says again, "Go, get yourselves straw where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced." So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, "Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw." Also, the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick both yesterday and today as before?" Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, "Why are you dealing thus with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, and they say to us, 'Make brick.' And indeed, your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people." But he said, "You are idle, idle. Therefore you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to Jehovah.'" You see what he's saying? You have too much time on your hands. And that's why you're asking to go worship. Verse 18. Therefore go now and work for straw. Therefore go now and work, for no straw shall be given you, yet you shall deliver the quota of bricks. And the officers of the children of Israel saw that they were in trouble after it was said, "You shall not reduce any bricks from your daily quota." Then as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron and stood there to meet them. And they said to them, "Let Jehovah look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us." So Moses returned to Jehovah and said, "Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it that you have sent me?" False accusation toward God. Did God bring this trouble on the people? No. It was a circumstance of what had happened. Pharaoh brought the trouble on the people. God just simply had them go and ask for something, and because of Pharaoh's haughtiness, because of his hardness of heart, he laid this burden on the people. Yet who's taking the blame? It's being given to God. Why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For verse 23, "For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all." Wow. Falsely accusing. Well, let's continue in chapter 6. Then Jehovah said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of this land. And God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Jehovah. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name Jehovah I was not known to them. And let me clear this up. A lot of people think that this means that that name wasn't being used. It was used. If you look back at these accounts, he was. But what he's saying is they didn't completely understand. Maybe at one time, I think Abraham did finally get it. But I think that some of them didn't really realize the character of God and the love that he had. By my name, Jehovah, I was not known to them. They used that name if we look back in those accounts. And obviously these people didn't know the character of God. Verse 4, I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan and the land of their pilgrimage in which they were strangers. And I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am Jehovah, I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am Jehovah your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am Jehovah. So Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses, because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. And Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, Go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the children of Israel go out of his hand. And Moses spoke before Jehovah, saying, The children of Israel have not heeded me. How then shall Pharaoh heed me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. Then Jehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command for the children of Israel and for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Now, this statement here that I am of uncircumcised lips, it's possible that Moses could have had some kind of maybe he was slow in speech, maybe he had a speech impediment, or maybe he just didn't feel comfortable doing this public speaking and being a spokesperson. It could be any number of those things. There have been some speculation about that. But either way, Moses was hesitant because he felt like he lacked something. We all lack something, but God can use us in a mighty way. Don't worry about what you lack. Don't worry about what your impediment is, whether it's a fear of man, whether it's a speech impediment, whether you're slow in speech, if you stutter, or if you just don't have a good way with words. God can use you in a mighty way, as we can see what happens here. Keep that in mind. Now we're going to skip because this goes into the lineage of the families of Moses and Aaron. Let's move down to verse 28 in chapter 6 of Exodus. Verse 28, it says, And it came to pass on the day Jehovah spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, that Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, I am Jehovah, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that I may all that I say to you. But Moses said before Jehovah, Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips, and how shall Pharaoh heed me? So again, Moses he's doubting himself. He's doubting himself. Verse 1 of chapter 7. So Jehovah said to Moses, See, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. Now, when it says here, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, this is another misconception. Look at what this God is doing. He's making this man a failure. That's not what this is saying. When we read this and we understand the language that's used, by the things that God does, Pharaoh's heart will become hardened. In other words, he's drawing him out. I'll give you an example. Not too long ago, I had sent something to someone, and it was a recording that I had done with permission. And I had permission of everyone that was there. And someone listened to the recording, and they heard something, and they called me up and said, "You should have edited out these words." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because that was inappropriate speech for that setting." And I said, "Well, the problem is if I alter that and I edit out those words, then people don't get to see the character of the one who said those very words. But if I allow that person to say it, they incriminate themselves." Point taken. You understand what I'm saying? So when God says, "I will harden Pharaoh's heart," in other words, I'm going to expose him that he will harden his own heart by the choices that he makes. He doesn't take those choices from us. Remember that. The God that we serve never takes our choice. We always have freedom to choose. But God, in his infinite knowledge and wisdom, knows what decision Pharaoh will make, because look at what he says in verse 4. But Pharaoh, Exodus 7 verse 4, "But Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies and you people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments." So he's saying Pharaoh's going to rebel. Verse 5, "And the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them." Then Moses and Aaron did so just as Jehovah commanded them. So they did. And Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. Verse 8, "Then Jehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, Show a miracle for yourselves, then you shall say to Aaron, Take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and let it become a serpent." So God knows what's going to happen. He sees this in advance, and he tells them, when he says this, this is what you're going to do. That had to be a faith builder for Moses. God told me this was going to happen just like this, so I'm going to do what he says. You see, I want to stop for just a moment, because when I read prophecies in the Bible, when I read things that we know from history are penned in advance, and then they come to fruition, that tells me that this is a special book. When the man Cyrus, historically we know that Cyrus was named before he was born, and yet people still doubt. The Dead Sea Scrolls prove that the things that were prophesied in Daniel happened after they were foretold. These should prove to you that the Bible is indeed a special book. So when Moses is seeing these things happen before his eyes, it's building his faith. He's trusting more and more in God at this point. Verse 10, "So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they did so just as Jehovah commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. But Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, so the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. For every man threw down his rod, and they became serpents, but Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard." Now, did God do that? What hardened Pharaoh's heart? The fact that this serpent that came from Aaron's rod devoured theirs. This angered him. God didn't harden his heart. His heart became hard because he didn't like what he saw. And now that puts him into a rebellion almost. And that can happen with us. We see something we don't like, we kind of ramp up and we get more mad. And we push harder. We oppose harder. Verse 13, it says again, "And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them as Jehovah had said." So just as God said, this took place. So notice what happens in verse 14. "So Jehovah said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning when he goes out to the water, And you shall stand by the river's bank to meet him, and the rod which was turned into a serpent you shall take in your hand. And you shall say to him, Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But indeed until now you will not hear. Thus says Jehovah, by this you shall know that I am Jehovah. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with a rod that is in my hand, that they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die. The river shall stink, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink the water of the river. Then Jehovah spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, and over their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in buckets of wood and in pitchers of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so just as Jehovah commanded. So he lifted up the rod and struck the waters that were in the river, and in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river turned into blood. The fish that were in the river died. The river stank. The Egyptians could not drink the water of the river. So there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Then the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, as Jehovah had said. This is a faith builder to Moses and Aaron, but it's hardening the heart of Pharaoh. Verse 23, and Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither was his heart moved by this. So all the Egyptians dug all around the river for water to drink, because they could not drink the water of the river. And 7 days passed after Jehovah had struck the river. Chapter 8. And Jehovah spoke to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Jehovah, let my people go, that they may serve me. You know something? It could have stopped right there. Okay. Go ahead. You see, is this God, this bloodthirsty, vengeful God that I keep hearing about in the Old Testament? Or is he's saying, look, if you don't let my people go, this is going to be the consequence. All you have to do, I'm just asking for 3 days. Just let them go for 3 days. They'll be back. He didn't say let them go for eternity. He just said let them go for 3 days. When God says that, he's not going to lie. This could have all been stopped. Verse 2. But if you refuse to let them go, I will smite all your territory with frogs. Well, people look at me all the time and say, what about those plagues that he brought on the Egyptians? Look at how bad they were. Well, wait a minute. Whose choice was it? God gave him the circumstance. If you don't do this, this is the consequence. And that's the problem with the world we live in. There are no consequences for my actions. Right now, if you live in New York City, you can go and you can rob somebody at gunpoint, and you can go they'll take you into the magistrate, and before 12:30, it's 5 minutes till 12 here, before 12:30, you'll be out on the street again. Why? Why is crime so high in these cities? Because there's no consequences for the actions. And God says, Pharaoh, if you don't let my people go, you're going to suffer the consequence. Here's the consequence. It's your choice. And if you said to a criminal, if you rob somebody at gunpoint, you're going to go to jail for a year, no questions asked, how many people do you think would be robbing people at gunpoint? It would diminish greatly. There are some people who would do it anyway, but it would diminish greatly. There are consequences for our actions. So, verse 3, so the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, into your bedroom, on your bed, into the houses of your servants, on your people, and into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls. And the frogs shall come upon you, on your people, and on all your servants. Then Jehovah spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams, over the rivers, over the ponds, cause frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. And what happens? He did it. And the frogs came. And I mean, this account is amazing when you read through it. I don't know how many of you have taken the time to read this from a perspective of, is this a God of love or not? And so many people read it because they're looking to find, I want to find a reason to not like God. And they read it and they look at it and they find the negative things. They don't see that he's warning him. Look, just let my people go. Just let them go for a few days. That's all I'm asking. Verse 8, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat Jehovah that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go that they may sacrifice to Jehovah. So here Pharaoh is saying, okay, I give. Take the frogs away, and I will let you go. Verse 9, and Moses said to Pharaoh, accept the honor of saying, when I shall intercede for you, for your servants, and for your people, to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river only. So he said, tomorrow. So he said, tomorrow. And he said, let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like Jehovah our God. And the frogs shall depart from you, from your houses, from your servants, from your people. They shall remain in the river only. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried out to Jehovah concerning the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. So Jehovah did according to the word of Moses. He kept his word. And the frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, out of the fields. They gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them, as Jehovah said. Wow. Okay, the frogs are gone now, so guess what? I'm not letting you go. Well, with that decision comes consequences. It was his choice. He could have simply let them go. So is God hardening his heart, or are the circumstances that he's in revealing the man Pharaoh and who he is? It's exposing Pharaoh for who he is. Just like sending that recording the way it was exposed the individual for what was being said. I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to delete anything. Just let the record show. And that's the beauty about reviewing the books in Revelation. Let the record show and vindicate the name of God and show that he is just, that he is love. Verse 16. So Jehovah said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. And the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice on man and beasts. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as Jehovah had said. Verse 20, and Jehovah said to Moses, rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh as he comes out to the river, and say to him, thus says Jehovah, let my people go that they may serve me, or else. So what's that mean? When you say, or else, that means if you let them go, you won't have any consequences in a negative way. But if you don't, this is what's going to happen. When my parents always gave me an or else, I knew they meant business. So when God says, let my people go that they may serve me, or else, this should have been a trigger in Pharaoh's head. There's going to be more consequences for my choice. It says, or else, if you will not let my people go, verse 21, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and on your servants, on your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. And in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know that I am Jehovah in the midst of the land. So what's he doing? This Pharaoh says, "Who is this Jehovah?" And he's saying, "You're going to find out. I'm going to do this so that you know who I am, so that you know what I can do." Verse 23, "I will make a difference between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall be." And Jehovah did so. Thick swarms of flies came into the house of Pharaoh, into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted because of the swarms of flies. Does God make a differential today between his people and those who are not? How do we know the difference? By their fruits. That's how we know the difference. He makes a distinction. Verse 25, "Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, 'Go sacrifice to your God in the land.' And Moses said, 'It is not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to Jehovah our God. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then will they not stone us? We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to Jehovah our God. He will command us.' So Pharaoh said, 'I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to Jehovah your God in the wilderness. Only you shall not go very far away. Intercede for me.' Then Moses said, 'Indeed, I am going out from you, and I will entreat Jehovah that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. But let Pharaoh not deal deceitfully anymore, in not letting the people go to sacrifice to Jehovah.' So Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And Jehovah did according to the word of Moses. He removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained." It's interesting, not even one fly. He removed them all. True to his word. But Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also. Neither would he let the people go. He keeps telling them, "I'm going to let you go. Do this and I'll let you go. Do this and I'm telling you, I would have, by this time, I'm done. My patience is through. I don't know about you. Maybe some of you folks have tremendous patience, the patience of Job, as we've often heard. I don't have that kind of patience. I would have been done. But what a lesson that I learned from reading this, because what happens is we see the character of Pharaoh exposed and the character of God revealed. The love, the patience, the justice, the mercy, the pleading. God is pleading with Pharaoh. He's trying to draw him out, but instead of drawing him out to be the man of God that he should be, he's becoming more and more opposed to God because his own selfish ways aren't happening. This can happen to us. This happens to people. Chapter 9. Then Jehovah said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh and tell him, 'Thus says Jehovah God, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me.'" You notice the message never changes. That's what I love about the Bible. The message is always the same. And so his message, he's not changing it. Well, let him go so that we can only go for 2 days. Or no, he's very clear. This is the message. It remains the same. God's word is the same way. There's no contradiction here. Verse 2. "For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of Jehovah will be on your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the oxen, and on the sheep, a very severe pestilence. And Jehovah will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt. So nothing shall die of that belongs to the children of Israel." Then Jehovah appointed a set time. Isn't this beautiful? He gives them not only the warning, but he says, "This is when I'm going to do it." He appoints a set time, saying, "Tomorrow Jehovah will do this thing in the land." So Jehovah did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. Then Pharaoh sent, and indeed not even one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh became hard, and he did not let the people go. Was this plague of this diseased livestock, whose fault was it that this fell on the Egyptians? It was Pharaoh's. All he had to do was say, okay, I'll keep my word. I'll do what I told you. Verse 8. So Jehovah said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh, and it will become fine dust in the land of Egypt, and it will cause boils to break out and sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. And they took ashes from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses scattered them toward heaven, and they caused boils that break out and sores on man and beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. But Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not heed them, just as Jehovah had spoken to Moses. So again, when it says Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, it wasn't that he hardened his heart. It was through these plagues, Pharaoh's heart is hardening. Pharaoh's pushing harder and harder. You know, we have an expression here in America, and I've used it. Sometimes when we see that something isn't quite right and I want to continue to believe what I want to believe, we dig in. Right? We just kind of say, you know what? I'm not budging. And this is what Pharaoh was doing. And whenever I've done that in my life and I said, I'm not budging, it's usually because I don't want to hear maybe what the truth is. And that's usually been something that would get me in trouble. I did that for a long time. I pushed against God's word. I learned a valuable lesson from doing that. I don't recommend it, but I did learn something from doing that. Let me see, where did I end? I kind of lost my place there. Yes, I think I was in, that was the boils. So here we go. Verse 13, I think, is where I am. Then Jehovah said to Moses, rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, this is chapter 9, verse 13, thus says Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. Same message. For at this time I will send all my plagues to your very heart and on your servants and on your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Now, if I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. As yet you exalt yourself against my people, in that you will not let them go. He's warning him again. He warns him before the plague falls. This is all you got to do, Pharaoh. It's all you have to do is let them go. You can end it. You can end the misery, because this one's going to be costly. Behold, verse 18, tomorrow about this time, giving him a time again. Tomorrow about this time I will cause a very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now. Therefore send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every animal which is found in the field and is not brought home, and they shall die. That's a God of love, warning them ahead of time. Sending out the warning. This is what's going to happen. Prepare yourself. Isn't that what's happening today? Isn't there a warning going out today telling people, be prepared because the day of the Lord is coming? And people want to ignore it. And they want to harden their hearts. And they want to not do the will of God. And they push against it. They dig in. It's really sad. Verse 20. He who feared the word of Jehovah among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. But he who did not regard the word of Jehovah left his servants and his livestock in the field. What were the consequences? Verse 22, then Jehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, on man, on beast, on every herb of the field throughout the land of Egypt. And Moses stretched out his rod toward heaven. And Jehovah sent thunder and hail and fire darted to the ground, and Jehovah rained hail on the land of Egypt. Wow. You know, these people were following their leader that didn't put their animals in. But if they followed the warning that was given by the godly people, they would have been saved. Verse 24, so there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, so very heavy that there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. Verse 25, and hail struck throughout the whole land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast, and the hail struck every herb of the field that broke every tree of the field, and broke every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail. And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said to them, I have sinned this time. Jehovah is righteous, and my people and I are wicked. Entreat Jehovah that there may be no more mighty thundering and hail, for it is enough. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. So Moses said to him, as soon as I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands to Jehovah, and the thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, that you may know that the earth is Jehovah's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you will not fear Jehovah God. Now the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in the head and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they are late crops. So Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh and spread out his hands to Jehovah. Then the thunder and hail ceased, and the rain was not poured on the earth. And when Pharaoh saw that the rain, the hail, the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet more. It doesn't say he sinned no more. He sinned yet more. And he hardened his heart, he and his servants. So the heart of Pharaoh was hard, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as Jehovah had spoken by Moses. So, who do you think was blamed for this? Is Pharaoh getting the blame from his people? Or is God getting it? How do you think Pharaoh's spinning it? God is doing this. If Pharaoh had made the right choice, if he would keep his word, these things wouldn't have been happening. Next, let's keep going just a little bit more. Chapter 10. Now Jehovah said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things that I have done in Egypt, and the signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am Jehovah. I can't state this enough. He is not making their hearts hard. They, by their choices, are hardening their hearts. He's giving them a choice, and they're choosing the one that's causing them to dig in. I can't state that enough. So many people love to look at this account and say, look at what God is doing to them. You can read the account and see that he is trying to save them. He wants to preserve them. He's warning them in advance, like he's doing today. Verse 3, so Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh and said to him, thus says Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me, or else. There it is again, another or else. If you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. Well, these locusts come and they eat up everything. That's what we're told as we read through. They covered the land. It's an amazing account. Let's keep reading, though. Verse 5, and they shall cover the face of the earth so that no one will be able to see the earth, and they shall eat the residue of what is left, which remains to you from the hail, and they shall eat every tree which grows up for you out of the field. They shall fill your houses, the houses of all your servants, the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen, since the day that they were on the earth to this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Now keep in mind that we read just a little bit ago that after the hail came, there was still some vegetation that hadn't quite sprouted yet that was in the ground. But what happens here? It comes and it takes it all away. And I guarantee you, in my thinking, I'm thinking Pharaoh knew that the harvest was still coming and he wasn't defeated yet. That's how my brain works when I read this account. He wasn't defeated because, wait a minute, we still have crops. We're not starved out yet. So I'm just going to wait. And what does God do? The locusts come. And he warned him, let him go or else this is going to happen. Then verse 7, Pharaoh's servant said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go that they may serve Jehovah their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed? So they're turning on him. So Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh, and he said to them, go, serve Jehovah your God. Who are the ones that are going? So now he's getting real now. He says, okay, go on, but I want to know who's going. So he's getting close, it sounds like, doesn't it? Verse 9, and Moses said, we will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds, we will go, for we must hold a feast to Jehovah. Then he said to them, Jehovah had better be with you when I let you and all your little ones go. Beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve Jehovah, for that is what you desired. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. And Jehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his rod, and it goes on. They rested on the territory of Egypt. I'm trying to speed this up for the sake of... we really should read it. I'm just going to read it. And Jehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand in verse 12 over the land of Egypt at the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and Jehovah brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts, and the locusts went up over the land of Egypt and rested on the territory of Egypt. They were very severe. Previously there had been no such locusts, nor had there been such after them. For they covered the face of the whole earth so that the land was darkened. And they ate every herb of the land, and every fruit of the trees which the hail had left. So there remained nothing green on the trees or on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh calls for Moses and Aaron in haste and said, I have sinned against Jehovah your God and against you. Here he goes again. Now therefore please forgive my sin this once, and entreat Jehovah your God that he may take away from me this death only. So he went out from Pharaoh and entreated Jehovah. And Jehovah turned a very strong west wind, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in the territory of Egypt. Interesting. Again, he takes it. God does what he says he's going to do. He said to Pharaoh, you're going to be as God to him. So what's he doing? He's saying to Moses, he's saying, when you tell him something, I will follow through. As long as it's within the will of God, that's the way it works. But Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart in verse 20, and he did not let the children go. Well, here's the 9th plague. Then Jehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may be felt. How do you feel darkness? It's dark. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt. 3 days. Interesting. He wanted to go for 3 days, so he puts him in darkness for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, "Go, serve Jehovah, only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you." But Moses said, "You must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings that we may sacrifice to Jehovah our God." He's saying, I'm not compromising. I'm not going to compromise. This is what Jehovah asks. This is what we're going to do. We're not listening to you, Pharaoh. We're not going to compromise and leave our animals. This is part of our worship because we must sacrifice to our God. Because this shows that we have faith in the coming Messiah. That's what this was proving. Our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. Verse 26 is where we are. For we must take some of them to serve Jehovah our God. And even if we do not know with what we must serve, Jehovah will serve Jehovah until we arrive there. But Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Take heed to yourself and see my face no more, for in the day that you see my face, you shall die." In other words, if I see you again, I'm going to put you to death. So Moses said, "You have spoken well. I will never see your face again." So here, at least 9 times, God has warned Pharaoh, given him an or else, and Pharaoh has always chosen to, I think I'll do that. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. This can happen to us. It can happen to us. Things start going good. When God removed those flies, suddenly, hey, everything's good now. Okay, let's go back to our normal ways. I'm sick and I pray for healing, and miraculously I'm healed and I'm doing well. Well, everything's good now. I'm just going to go back to living my life. No, I believe that God healed me and God made me well. I'm grateful, so I want to do His will. I want to do His bidding. Chapter 11. And Jehovah said to Moses, "I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. Afterward, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out of here altogether. Speak now in the hearing of the people." So, what's he doing? He's not just telling Pharaoh. He's not going to leave this to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, "I don't want to see your face anymore. If I do, I'm going to kill you." So God says, I want the people to hear this message. Don't let him adulterate it. Speak to the people and let every man ask from his neighbor and every woman from her neighbor articles of silver and articles of gold. Verse 3, and Jehovah gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. Then Moses said, "Thus says Jehovah, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt." So he says, thus says who? Jehovah. "About midnight I will go out into the midst of the people, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind at the handmill, and the firstborn of the animals. Then there shall be a great cry throughout the land of Egypt, such as was not like it before, nor shall be like it again. But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue, against man or beast, that you may know that Jehovah does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel." He makes a distinction. Why did he have Moses say this in the realm of the people? Because there's something they needed to do to save their families from this tragedy. Verse 8, "And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, 'Get out, and all the people who follow you.' That after that I will go out." Then he went out from Pharaoh in great anger. But Jehovah said to Moses, "Pharaoh will not heed you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt." So Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. Chapter 12. Now Jehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons, according to each man's need. You shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Sounding familiar if we've never read through this. Verse 11, and thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist and with sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is Jehovah's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and will strike the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Jehovah. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, that when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to Jehovah throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. What's this pictorial of? The blood of the Lamb of Jesus Christ. And when you have the blood of the Lamb on your doorpost, that's your heart. That's exactly right. When you have that blood of the Lamb, you have salvation because of what Jesus has done for you. The blood of that lamb that they put on that doorpost, you enter through the door, right? Isn't Jesus the door? You enter through the door. You enter through Christ. You enter your relationship with God through Christ. You come to the Father through Christ. These people had an understanding. Anyone who did this, anyone, whether Israelite or Egyptian or farmer in the field, someone who wasn't even related, if they did this, their firstborn would live. God is warning them. Their firstborn didn't have to die. Pharaoh's firstborn didn't have to die. Remember, say this in the ears of the people. He wanted everyone, whoever wanted to listen to that command, whoever wanted to do this thing, they had salvation in their families. They wouldn't lose their firstborn. Verse 15, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove the leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leaven and bread on the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. God just wants obedience. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared for you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. Now some people look at that and say we should still be doing that. But an everlasting ordinance, when we look at that, until it is fulfilled in Christ Jesus. He fulfilled this. We don't put blood on our door anymore. We don't sacrifice lambs anymore. It was everlasting until the Son comes. We have to make that clear. And remember, this took place on what day? It was Nisan 14. It was Passover. And the other thing, the misconception that commonly happens, people will say, I often hear this. In fact, I was thinking about this yesterday. Yesterday morning, I was running through this account in my mind, thinking about the sermon while I was walking. And a friend sends me a joke, and it's just a little silly little blurb. And he always sends me these funny little jokes that you can share with anyone. They're kid jokes you can tell to your kid. And they're kind of like dad, I guess they call them dad jokes. And I forward them to you guys every now and then. But in there, it talked about the angel of death. Well, where in the Bible do I see the angel of death? It's a common misconception. This doesn't say the angel of death will come. Look at verse 12 of chapter 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night. God passes through. There's not an angel of death. You can't find an angel of death in the Bible. But so many Christians say, well, when the angel of death comes, the angel of death is Lucifer himself. That's the angel of death. It's Satan. He's the one who causes death. But it doesn't refer to an angel of death. I can't find it. I've done word searches in many different Bible translations and haven't yet found that term. Maybe some translation uses it. But a lot of people think that the angel of death passes over. No, when God sees that the blood of his Son is on that doorpost, he spares that life. And when he sees the blood of his Son is in here, he spares that life. It's beautiful. So I want to encourage you to read this account. I know we haven't finished. We understand. If we've read this, we recognize. Look at verse 23. It says in chapter 12, verse 23, for Jehovah will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, Jehovah will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. Who's the destroyer? The destroyer is death. The destroyer is what the enemy Satan has brought. It's sin. That's what causes this whole problem. And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which Jehovah will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? That you shall say, it is a Passover sacrifice of Jehovah, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our household. So the people bowed their heads and worshipped. This doesn't show a bloodthirsty God. This shows a God who is trying to preserve life and just trying to get people to obey and listen to his laws. Because when we listen to his laws, our lives are always better. Is my life better as a thief or not? Is my life better as a murderer or not? Is my life better as an adulterer or not? I mean, these are very simple questions. Yet we say that obedience is, well, that's just asking too much. If anybody were to come to your house and stay and they didn't live by your rules, if they walked down on your brand new carpet with mud on their shoes, that's not obeying your rules. You wouldn't let them stay there very long. If they came into your house and they didn't bathe for 2 or 3 weeks, you wouldn't let them stay there. You'd say, look, take a bath. You want to stay here? Take a shower. You stink. You're not going to let them stay there. Yet we look at God and say, well, he gave us all of this. He knows what's best for us. And because he's asking me to do these things that are good for me, that makes him a hateful God? What kind of a sick, twisted world do we live in? That's what has become of this world. That's why the world lies in the power of the wicked one. He's turning everything upside down. Friends, it upsets me when people falsely accuse the God that I worship. It's offensive. The God that I worship, that you worship, this is the God that gave life to you, that gives you life eternal. You know, he could have made us as humanity to where we just assimilate food like a tree. Just take your fingers and put it in the soil and you get fed. But no, he gives us taste and a variety of flavors. He gives us not just eyesight, but sight and color in 3D. Brother Ed was talking about the beauty of the trees after the leaves have fell. It was like a beautiful carpet, all these different colors. We don't have to see in color. It's a God of love that gives us that. It's a God of love that gives us fellowship and companionship and that allows us to hear. We hear in 3D. Yes, it's stereo. If you block one ear, you lose that. But with 2 ears, you can tell and you can pick out where things are coming from. That's 3 dimensions. He gives us thinking ability. All of these senses that we have that He's given us can bring glory to Him. And we have them because of Him. So when people falsely accuse the God that I worship, I have to stand up and I have to say something. I can't keep quiet. I want to turn to one last text. Let's just turn to 2 Peter chapter 3. There were a lot more things. I was telling somebody yesterday, I said, I could do a sermon every week for a year on just these accounts right here in Exodus. It would be so easy to do, but some people may find it rather boring, but I find it really exciting. 2 Peter chapter 3. And this is about a promise of God. This is a promise. Let's just read a few verses here. Verse 1. Beloved, I write you this second epistle in which both I stir up your pure minds by way of reminder. Why does he feel the need to remind us? Because just like Pharaoh, things start going good. Oh, the flies are gone. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. We start feeling good. Times get easy. We tend to overlook things. When times are rough, that's when we turn to God. Why is that? It's part of our sinful nature, unfortunately. Verse 2, that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior. Knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. It's a warning. It's a warning just like Pharaoh had. This needs to be read more often. But, verse 8, beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. I beat this horse to death. This is not talking about a day literally being as 1,000 years to us. So many people try to use this to get rid of the 6 days of creation. It's saying that because of the time that God has been, which is eternity, 1,000 years is just like a snap of the fingers. The longer we live, the faster time goes. A year to me goes by like a month at these. I can't believe we're in November. We're in November. It seems like January just started. So the older we get, the faster time goes. But I love verse 9. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us. Was God long-suffering toward Pharaoh? Yes. Not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. This is what he was trying to do with those in Pharaoh's day, in the days of Moses. He wanted them all to recognize the life-saving blood of the Lamb. And if they did that, they were preserved. Their family was preserved. And so many people blame God. Well, why did God have to do that? Well, actually, it was because of Pharaoh that happened. It was because of Pharaoh. He could have prevented that. He could have prevented it. So, making these accusations toward our Heavenly Father and toward His Son, it's offensive, and I had to speak about it. There are so many things that we could look at in these Bible accounts that point out the love of God and the pains that he is going through. The very fact that he loved you enough to send his son to die for you. Risking everything. You know, we forget the fact that Jesus could have chosen to sin. He felt his weakness. Father, not my will, but yours. He wanted to do the will of the Father. If it wasn't possible for him to sin, then it was all just a big joke. It was a big hoax. But it was possible for him to sin. God risked everything, including his son, and his son was willing to do it. That's how much love God has for you. Yet we paint him as this. We look at the Old Testament. One last thing I have to state, and I want to state this because not everything is written in the Bible. Not everything that happened in those times are written in the Bible. We have accounts that tell us little bits and pieces of what took place, enough to give us the faith that we need to know that God exists, and to know that his Son exists, and to know the plan of salvation. So when we read these accounts, if we want to look for ways to condemn God and our mind wants to go that way, we can read part of a verse and take it out of context. Just like they do on news today. They'll take a blurb or a clip. And that's what a lot of people do when they criticize this book. But I encourage you to study it, read it, learn who the God of heavens is, and learn who his Son is. And the only way that you can learn about our Father is by looking at the Son. The Son is a direct reflection of his Father. So when you say that this God of the Old Testament is a different God than the God of the New Testament, you're calling Jesus a liar, because Jesus says, that is my Father and my God in John. He says that. And he does what his Father wants him to do. So when we read those Old Testament accounts and we look and we say, wow, how could he wipe out these people? If you look at the patience that he had with them, how much time, how many times he turned his back on and I don't mean turned his back, but turned away so as not to have to destroy them, and gave them chance after chance after chance. And here we are drawing in on the close of time, and we still have people that are looking back there and trying to condemn God for doing a good thing. So falsely accusing the living God, it's a dangerous thing to do. And if we just listen to the Word of God, if we just trust him, obey him, life goes so much better. And he sent his Son so that you could have life eternal.